We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, deja vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to the Friday edition of Free Association Radio. This is the Friday Forecast. I'm your host, Robert Phoenix, and today is the 16th of December, 2011, and we are at 24 degrees Sagittarius, and the Sun is getting ready to conjunct by Jupiter. Yes, indeed. Sun conjunct Jupiter in the sign of the Centaur, so it would make sense in a kind of grand, synchronistic, kind of cosmic way, the grand setup that we would have today's guest on. Today, I'm going to be featuring for as long as we can talk about it, and the subject in all of its wonder and splendor, Linda Kohanov, author of the Tao of Equus, which was a groundbreaking book in terms of being able to make a really profound connection between humans and horses and what they mean to us in our lives and what we mean to them as well. And we're going to be talking about horses with Linda shortly. Let me just get in and open up the chat room here and fire that up so people can jump on in and talk. And I think there's going to be a point later in the show after Linda and I get some momentum and talk about this subject a little bit that we'll be opening this up to people to call in and ask questions about horses, maybe share a couple of horse stories if you've had some profound experiences with horses that you'd like to bring to the conversation, or maybe you want to find out more about Linda's program down in Tucson and all the great stuff she's doing in terms of horses and the meta meaning with horses and being able to learn with them and from them. So we'll be opening that up maybe a little bit later in the show if you want to do that. Today, if every day I play the same opening, which probably I'll change at some point, but I carved that out myself, and that is that's a little clip from Philip K. Dick, and that came from a conference, a sci-fi conference in Metz, in France. I was back in the 70s. I think it might have been 1976, and Metz is where I was born in Verdun, but it was the very first place I lived in as a child. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And today is Philip K. Dick's birthday. And he was born in 1928. If you look at his astrological chart, it is pretty freaking amazing. He's got 4 trines from Neptune to various planets in his chart, and 1 sextile, Neptune, of course, being the planet of imagination. And Philip K. Dick, born in 1928, there was a man ahead of his time, right? So today's his birthday. There's a couple of other interesting birthdays, but let's get right to the heart of today's show, and let's bring on, without any further delay, Linda Kohanov, straight from Tucson, Arizona.
Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hey, Linda. How's it going?
Good.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So just a little prehistory for folks. I first met you through your husband, Steve, who is Steve Roach. Some people, know that Steve is a prolific and creative and talented electronic musician. And, and I knew about you through your writing with Pulse Magazine at the time. You were doing a lot of exploration with space music and electronic music and new age music. Always loved your writing. And then I met you down in Tucson at your house over a very blurry 3 days, and was really struck by your intelligence, your life force, your sense of humor, and then I kind of moved away from music. And even though I stayed in touch with Steve a little bit, meanwhile you're making this transition from music and still staying in touch with writing, but incorporating this whole other vector with your relationship with horses. And you come out with the Tao of Equus, which is an incredibly influential book, and a lot of people, anybody who has any, quasi-sophisticated relationship with horses knows this book and the work that you did. What I'm really interested in, Linda, is your background with horses and how you, were you raised around them? How did they influence you at an early age? And more importantly, I think in some ways, how to make a transition from one career to another. Because I think a lot of people are staring down, what do I do now? My corporate job is over. How do I move towards something that's either more passionate, more fulfilling, and make a smooth transition to that? So I know it's a big question, but I'd love to start with your relationship to horses and this really interesting transition you made in your life.
Well, I loved horses as a child, as many kids do, particularly girls, but my parents were afraid of horses, so I wasn't even allowed to take riding lessons. But I would sneak off to an old horse trainer's farm when they didn't know I was going there, and I would get on these transient horses bareback and play with them. My parents had no idea I was doing this. It was much more dangerous than taking riding lessons, I'll tell you that much. But then I went to college and got a degree in music. I'm a violist, a classically trained violist, and worked in public radio for many years, and became a music critic, and that's how I met Steve Roach, and we moved out to the desert here in the late 1980s, early 90s, and I was working in radio and writing for Pulse and a magazine called CD Review and a few other music magazines, and working at this classical radio station here in Tucson. And I was getting really frustrated with all of the dramas that you would get involved in, not just with famous musicians who have sometimes colossal egos, but also all the dramas that would go on behind the scenes at this radio station, where it was pretty much a business, and it was owned by a communications department of a major university, but there wasn't a whole lot of real, authentic communication going on. There were lots of power plays and little hidden dramas and all kinds of stuff. So at a certain point, I just decided to buy a horse, and my goal was to ride off into the desert and get as far away from the confusing world of human beings as possible on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and what was interesting was that I found that when I was with the horses, they were actually teaching me things about how to become more empowered and how to become better adjusted mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. These things were affecting my life at a really profound level. And so I realized that horses had an ability to teach human beings some amazing skills that we could all use, whether or not you consider yourself a horse person or not. Learning with horses can actually change your life, and it took me 6 years to write the Tao of Equus, but once it came out, then I realized there were a lot of people around the world who had always had an attraction to horses, and they weren't really interested in becoming people who rode in shows necessarily, but they always felt an attraction to horses, and it's some knowing that a horse could change their life on some level, and so that's what my work has been about for the past 15 years.
I was just cruising around your website the past couple of days, and one of the workshops that you're offering is how to tune in to not just horses, but reality at kind of a nonverbal level. And I'm assuming that when you were beginning to sort of braid your relationship with your own horse and horses in general, this is all happening non-verbally. Can you talk a little bit about that very subtle process that went on and sort of how you began to kind of meld with the horse and how the horse would teach you things, and maybe some little key moments that really clicked for you and said, aha, there's really something going on here?
Sure. For years, when people would ask me what I was doing out at the barn, because it was odd for me to be a fairly well-known music critic and journalist, and then all of a sudden be spending all this time at the barn and telling people I was writing a book about what horses can do for people. People would say, what are you doing out there? And I would be speechless. It really took me about 6 years to translate what was transforming inside of me, what I was learning, to translate that into words. And since then, psychologists have determined that, especially during interpersonal interactions, only about 10% of human communication is verbal. And so even among humans, 90% of the messages we send back and forth to each other and that we receive from our own body, our own mind, our own spirit, and our own intuition, these things are nonverbal messages. And that's why it feels so mystical and at first, but at the same time, it's simply that it's just nonverbal material. So there are ways to begin to interact with those nonverbal elements, that other 90%, that can enhance your life and your relationships in all these amazing ways. And so the horses taught me to really pay attention to that other 90% and develop that other 90%.
Mm-hmm. Was there any specific interaction or moment where it was like something really clicked and you were really aware that there was a whole new level or an entirely new layer to what you were experiencing?
Absolutely. One of the key moments was understanding that with humans, most people in our culture are taught to suppress emotion and, suppress fear or anger or sadness, whatever we consider the most vulnerable or socially unacceptable emotions. We suppress those and wear a mask of perhaps control or happiness or everything's fine. But the problem is that over time those emotions continue to build, and even some of our most well-adjusted, sanest colleagues will explode now and then when you get that straw that breaks the camel's back effect, and some small trigger releases a whole bunch of emotion, and then people act out in these ways that they're later embarrassed about, which then cause people to think that, yes, emotions are irrational sensations that just blow up at the wrong moment and cause us tremendous problems and embarrassment. But, coming from the music world, I had the opposite situation where I was taught to express emotion for years and was rewarded for it and have a degree in it and married somebody who's very good at it. And I realized that people who express emotion don't lead any more functional lives either. Just think about all the famous musicians who had terrible romantic tragedies and all kinds of ill-fated romances and real problems in life that they may or may not have ever even surmounted. So, what are you, Robert? Are you more of a suppressor or an expressor?
I'm an expressor. And I'm definitely in the expressor mode. I went through the entire 1990s was kind of an extended experience in primal therapy for me without the primal therapist. So yeah, I'm an expressive for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Does Steve ride horses? Is he into them?
No, he does some minor things with them. He enjoys them, but he's spends a large amount of time composing music and managing that aspect of his life. So, but we have a house here where it's just completely surrounded by all of our horse corrals, and so he's very supportive of the horses and feels tremendous inspiration from them.
He's a mountain bike guy, isn't he?
Well, he was doing some mountain bicycling for years, and then he got into vintage motocross racing, and so he's been doing that recently to blow off some steam, and he's really amazingly good at it. He did this in the early years of motocross racing in California because he grew up there, and recently got back into that as well.
So he's coming full circle with that, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. So he has a lot of fun with the music and the motocross racing, and we spend some quiet time in the desert and with the horses as well.
So,
but when I was with the horses, well, I mean, all these crazy musicians and radio station people, like I said, were driving me crazy. And when I got my first horse and I was out of the barn, I started to notice that horses did something special with emotion that was incredibly well adjusted. For me, it was the answer to using emotion effectively in our human lives. And first of all, what I noticed was that horses use emotion as information. So over time, when I watched their behavior, I realized that they actually engaged what is essentially a 4-point method for using emotion effectively in a really balanced, agile way. And so what they do is they feel the emotion in its purest form. The second thing they do is they get the message behind it. And there are really quite consistent, quite rational messages behind all the emotions we consider to be troublesome and suppressed. And then they change something in response to that message. And then probably the hardest thing for a human to do is that they let the feeling go after they get the message and change something in response. And they go back to grazing. In other words, they go back to enjoying life. So horses spend 99% of their day in this state of deep connection and peace because they move through emotion efficiently. Unlike people who suppress emotion or express emotion, and they never get past step one if you're doing that. So I realized that expressing emotion are two sides of the same dysfunctional coin, that we need to do the full 4 steps that horses do daily, and our lives can be so much more enjoyable and just, moving through the emotions that way enhances your life, gives you information that you would normally be ignoring, and then also it just frees up all of this energy for passion and enjoyment and just this sense of deep peace in your life.
So when I look at it from the human perspective, and people have a crisis or a life shock moment, and then they have to tap into their emotions or deal with their emotions, obviously it's not just the emotions. There's history, there's patterns, there's all kinds of things that are associated in very subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways with that emotional experience. With horses, and I'm sure horses have their own history and their own trauma in their own lives, but they're able to really move through the emotion very quickly because in many ways they don't have this complicated web of interrelatedness with a life shock or traumatic moment. How can you teach people to really cut through the history, which is no longer really serving them at that moment, to get to some sort of resolution, in that moment? How do the horses teach us that?
Well, that's the basis for several of my books, and also now a web symposium that I teach people a lot of these skills over the web, especially for people who can't travel from around the world to come here for workshops, there are certain elements of these skills that I can now teach through words, although it took me a number of years to translate them into words. But this method for emotional agility that horses use and the messages behind troublesome emotions is something that can be taught through words and over long distance. Mm-hmm. Horses are animals that are preyed upon in nature. So, a lot of people think that horses live in a state of constant hypervigilance. And, in nature they can be attacked. And so if they had a response to fear and trauma in the same way that humans do, they would be nervous wrecks, and they aren't. So they actually use fear as a signal, as nature's warning system. And they can, because they're so present with what's happening and willing to use emotion as information, they can tell if a lion is on the prowl, or they can tell if the lion has just eaten a big meal. And so you'll see in the first case, they'll run and move to a position of safety. Or horses will turn around as a group if they're cornered and fight, and very rarely does a lion or a pack of wolves win over a group of horses. It's just almost unheard of. So horses are actually non-predatory power animals. They're, you might call them prey animals because they're not non-carnivorous, but they're not victims and they're not weak. And so they teach us a lot about being non-predatory in a predatory world, and being successful and being confident, and ultimately going through life with a deep sense of peace and passion and enjoyment. So with humans, because we've been taught to generally suppress emotions or express emotions without getting the message behind them, mm-hmm. What happens is that we're amenable to control by authority figures. I mean, the whole reason we're taught to suppress emotion really comes from the fact that we live in a dominant submission paradigm. I mean, even now, we are taught to ignore the important messages behind emotions and submit to an outside authority figure. Mm-hmm. And so that's what causes a lot of our trauma is this inability to access the information coming to us from emotions, which is just a really sophisticated system in your body. It's like your body's a tuner and receiver and amplifier for all kinds of information coming from the environment, from other beings. And your body can sense, truly, when somebody has your best interest at heart and when somebody's really out to control you or manipulate you. And so by having our children taught from an early age to suppress body sensations and to ignore emotional information and to submit to an outside authority figure, we lose contact with all of those important messages, and then we're easily controlled and often traumatized.
Yeah.
So, so by reclaiming that knowledge, you can pretty much instantly start to turn your life around.
I think that type of understanding is absolutely priceless. I mean, you cannot put an economic value on being able to be authentic and respond in an authentic fashion on a moment-to-moment basis. I think it is the fulcrum of the human experience. When we talk about the herd, right? And this is a big part of your work, the power of the herd. Many people think of herds as like herds of cattle or herds of sheep, and rarely do they think of herds of horses. And I find that fascinating, Linda, because we've been conditioned to wrap our heads around this whole concept of the herd in a pretty negative fashion. And yet, through your work with horses and this non-sort of victim, non-predatory, powerful, instinctual social organization, there's a whole new definition of the herd. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, it really gets interesting because I'm working on my fourth book right now, and it's actually called The Power of the Herd, and the subtitle is Building Social Intelligence visionary leadership and authentic community through the way of the horse. And, a lot of times when we want to become empowered, we often go through that sort of independent, quote-unquote lone wolf stage as we're trying to get away from all of the social influences that have disempowered us and caused us to lose connection with our authentic voice and our authentic power. But actually, horses teach us how to be empowered in relationship to others. And because the horse is a power animal, a non-predatory power animal, I mean, we still measure the power of our engines in terms of horsepower.
Right.
They show us another way of being in, having relationship as a source of power. Because, like I said, in nature, lions and wolves will hardly ever attack adult horses because they can't stand up to 3 or 4, powerful 1,000-pound animals that work together to protect themselves. And I think that now more than ever we have to realize that we need the skills to engage that kind of power if we're going to change the world at all. Because what's happening right now is we have a large number of bullies and sociopaths and predatory businessmen out there that take advantage of the fact that people don't know how to be powerful together in groups.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who are highly sensitive people and highly empathetic, they have a hard time engaging power, exploring power, because all of our models of power in this culture are predatory models of power. And so to have a horse as a non-predatory example of power is quite amazing. And so one of the things that I did was I have been researching recently some of the nomadic cultures that essentially, how do I explain this quickly? Because I'm writing a whole book about it. Sedentary cultures such as ours have created forms of power that are really quite rudimentary and quite adolescent. Kind of dominant submission hierarchies is generally what we do. And we often think of a person who's a leader as a dominant individual who engages power over others, right?
Yeah.
And in traditional nomadic cultures that are pastoral cultures that move with herds of animals, it's really interesting because there are no fences. These people have no fences to confine their horses and cattle and sheep and goats. And they really can't engage in a large amount of restraint either. And so this becomes a metaphor and actual real skills involved in learning how to move with others in communities when all the fences fall down. And right now, all the fences are starting to fall down in terms of structured power over controls in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at nomadic cultures, they actually are masters at socializing an interspecies culture into creating a situation where they stay together and they're coordinated in situations where there are no fences and there is no particular territory, and they can move through these situations and deal with predatory elements and stay together no matter what happens. And what you see in those cultures is that they're highly influenced by herd behavior, which is very sophisticated. So, for instance, let me just let you know that in a herd, the dominant individual and the leader are actually two different animals.
So
and we often think of the dominant and the leader as the same, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So a dominant individual in a herd asserts power by keeping others away from something that's valuable. And so the dominant individual in a herd will keep, other horses or cattle away from females in heat, or away from favorite herd members, or away from valuable food, or away from valuable water, or something like that.
Okay.
And they also, the good thing about a dominant individual in a herd is that they also do something interesting that's useful, is that they break up fights between individuals. So that's a helpful element.
Sure.
But they also do this crazy thing where they assert dominance by attacking individuals for no apparent reason at times. So they keep everybody a little bit on edge.
Interesting.
So when you see a dominant individual walk into a herd, you see the others kind of look away and then get ready to move away really quickly. And that makes it hard for this dominant individual to lead anyone anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So what you find is a herd leader is a much quieter, more balanced individual. And they have this interesting quality where they're simultaneously, they just don't, they're sort of in the social life of the herd, but at the same time they have this quality where they're kind of a seeker, and they're interested in new things that scare other herd members in the beginning. And so the leader of the herd will often move out and check out something interesting, and then because he's calm in new situations and calm as an explorer, then the other herd members become interested in what that leader's doing, and they follow that leader. And but the dominant is often the most insecure member of the herd. He tries to keep everybody together because he can't stand to be alone without everybody that he loves and values.
That's funny. That's really funny.
So you begin to see that some of the things that alpha-style leaders in our culture, some of the things that they do that seem kind of irritating or inexplicable is actually highly instinctual behavior of a dominant personality. They can't help themselves. And so the interesting thing about watching these herding cultures is that a really good herdsman in one of those cultures actually learns how to take on the role of the dominant and the herd leader, as well as a nurturing, companionable member of the herd that kind of creates the glue that keeps the herd together. So it's a very sophisticated leadership model, because at times you actually need to be a dominant.
Right.
But at times you need to be the leader and have everyone's trust. And at times you also need to create that nurturing, companionable feeling that makes everyone feel secure and welcome and warm in your in your presence.
It's incredibly sophisticated and a full spectrum, sort of all complete human access. I mean, it's everything across the board. It's nurturing. It can be dominant. It's also interactive and interdependent. So you're absolutely sophisticated. When you were talking about this quality of being able to manage herds in areas without fences and to move them too, like what the Mongolians or the Tuvans would do. The minute you started to talk about it, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this is really sophisticated. I mean, they've got to manage all this without any kind of real controls. And I thought to myself, yeah, there's absolutely tons that we can learn from this. Now I'm assuming that horses also have this quality as well, and that the herdsmen have learned from the herd themselves, right? Yes, and that's the interesting thing about these interspecies cultures, is that they literally truly are an interspecies society, so that the humans are influenced as much by the behavior of their horses and their cattle as the animals are influenced by human behavior, because there are certain things that the horses and the cattle do to become more in alignment with the humans that's beyond their normal instinctual behavior. And the same thing, with the human side, where they become more horse-like in order to bring the two societies together. And if you really look back on it,
think about the whole Cain and Abel story in the Bible. It totally then makes sense of that whole situation where, you might think, well, why is it that, in Genesis, Cain, who's this agriculturalist who raises grains and fruits and vegetables, why is his sacrifice to God turned down? And why is Abel, who is the shepherd, the pastoralist, has the sheep and the cattle following him around, why is his sacrifice accepted? And it really appears to be some kind of divine intelligence stating a preference for this kind of nomadic interspecies association that allows you, it really is now scientifically being shown that interspecies associations with animals actually create developmental, behavioral, and biochemical advantages to human beings. So it's almost like, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, this Bible story was almost like a recommendation to not plant yourself in one place, but to literally allow yourself to move with the animals, feel at home in nature, to create an interdependent relationship with nature, not a power-over relationship where you fence in all the animals and these days, factory farming, we grow animals like vegetables with no concern whatsoever for their lives as sentient social beings. So it's just a very, very interesting take on history and on, one of the oldest recorded stories that we have about, about our heritage.
Yeah. It's fascinating because I think in our society we have such a stigma around being nomadic, that if you are moving around or having to relocate or even if you have kind of a gypsy spirit, you're kind of considered an outsider in an agrarian society, which has morphed into an urban society. And I think that if anything, this could be a wonderful tool for people to be able to embrace this whole concept of being in transition or not necessarily being rooted to a physical location without suffering some sort of a social stigma or judgment. Am I right?
Yeah, and I think now more than ever we are becoming more nomadic again.
Yeah.
Because of, increased, very affordable transportation options, So it's not like we can be owned by owner-masters anymore, because even quote-unquote commoners can now, fly to Europe if you feel like it, or you can, buy a house in Nebraska and have a, winter condo in Florida if you want. And, we become more and more nomadic that way. We transfer for jobs, move to other places. We are more mobile than we've ever been before, and it's causing a shift in our culture and our power structures, and so we need these other skills.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that prompted me to get in touch with you was what's happened recently with the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, and lifting the ban to, go after our friends, the wild horses, and allow them to be slaughtered for horse meat. And I was just scanning Twitter today, and this quote from Nietzsche came up, and it said that man is the cruelest animal. And I thought, well, this is an interesting quote in light of what we're going to be talking about today a little bit. I'd like for you to maybe, if you can, expand on the how tragic in some ways, in many ways, not just some ways, what the Department of the Interior has decided to do with wild horses, and how visceral this is. And we're talking like hunting from a helicopter with guns. It doesn't get much more barbaric than that. I'd like for you to be able to speak to that, Linda, not just from a political perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective, perhaps, and how important it is for the wild horse to be able to exist and to roam. I know this probably hits you at a pretty deep level, so let's see where we can go with this very, very touchy and vulnerable subject.
Well, there's the whole thing started back in the 1950s, and you can look at the story of this up on the internet if you want more details, but I'll try to recap it really quickly. And this woman named Wild Horse Annie, she proposed what turned out to be the first act to protect wild horses that was passed in 1959. I think it was called the Wild Horse Annie Wild Horse and Burro Act or something like that. And she was really concerned because at that time there were a lot of people going out with trucks and cars, and they probably didn't have as good of access to helicopters at that time, but they were going out and they were catching wild horses and sending them off to slaughter. And she was really concerned with the inhumane ways that they were being treated. And she started this movement, and this act was actually passed because a lot of people really consider the wild horse to be a symbol of the American West, a really meaningful symbol, because more than anything, the wild horse is an example of anyone who escapes injustice and slavery, which is why we're all here in this country anyway, because the wild horse is actually not a wild horse, technically. A wild horse is a feral horse that was brought over when the conquistadors brought horses to the United States and to North America. And these were horses that escaped, and they created their own highly functional societies on their own. And so basically a lot of people don't realize that, when we think of that whole cowboys and Indians culture with Indians riding all the horses and all of that.
Yeah.
That only really existed for about 300 years because before then, Native Americans didn't have horses because horses weren't here yet.
That's
and
right.
Actually, if you want to get even more technical, there's some indication that horses evolved in North America and then moved across the Bering Strait and then died out here several 100,000 years ago. And then it's almost like they went all the way around the world and then came back to the place. They were actually brought back to this place again. So it's a very interesting and very highly symbolic relationship that people have with wild horses, because wild horses represent the ability to escape from slavery and tyranny and then move into the wilderness and reclaim a herd-based lifestyle in connection with nature.
Mm-hmm.
So more than anything, that's what the wild horses mean to people. And they lead amazingly sophisticated social lives. And so I think that a lot of studies and understanding horse behavior come from watching wild horses now, because they do all kinds of wild things, like some stallions will actually collect groups of mares that are all the same color. So it's like they're in, some stallions like redheads and some stallions like blondes and some like brunettes. They have a color preference. And you wouldn't know that from interacting with domesticated horses because they never get to do things like that.
Wow.
Some horses you'll find that the mares are actually more dominant, and the stallions, the herd stallion is more gentle and maybe even got in with a herd of mares, not by fighting another stallion, but by actually forming an alliance with a mare or two that appreciate a more supportive presence. And you also see that highly violent dominant stallions, young stallions, are actually run out of the herd until they can learn how to calm down. And most stallions never get to have a herd of mares until they're in their teens. They actually have to learn some kind of self-control and socialization skills in order to be even let into that situation. So there's a lot of understanding of herd behavior, non-predatory herd behavior, by having wild horses.
So let me just play with this a little bit. So if we can learn something from wild horses, it means that I could have like a number of mares that are like blonde or brunette. I mean, can that translate to the human experience?
Maybe so.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know.
Right. That's good news for you, huh?
Yeah, for sure. So here we are now. Ken Salazar says, "Okay, it's open season." I mean, to me, this feels like. To me, Linda, this feels like a ritual slaughter. I mean, this is what it feels like. You know, when I look at a movie like War Horse, which opens on the 25th of December, a very symbolic day, we have Ken Salazar saying, "Okay, go get him," you know, horse meat for all. It's all kind of lining up all the month of Sagittarius, right? You know, right around the equinox. You know, all of this,
right.
You know, all of this really interesting kind of meta information is coalescing around the horse right now. And then I hear, like, you know, obviously rumbles of war, you know, troops lining up on the borders of Syria, you know, and all this, you know, deep chatter about, you know, Iran. And, you know, it's a fascinating kind of assemblage of symbols and elements. And I think that there is the very, you know, real and visceral proponent to this, which is, you know, horses now are going to be taken out of their environment. Is there also another part of this? Are ranchers like, you know, working with lobbyists to, you know, get into the Department of the Interior, and so they can now, you know, either, you know, go after the horses or now use horses for their own purposes in terms of horse meat? I mean, is there a political angle to this as well, Linda?
Yeah, there is. And this has been going on for a long time. So for instance, this Wild Horse Anti-Act prohibited anyone from using motor vehicles or helicopters, or also poisoning water holes, because, you know, before this act was even created, ranchers were trying to remove horses from grazing lands, from public grazing lands. And others were, you know, killing them for meat or sending them off to slaughter and having a little business on the side with that sort of thing. And so then around 1971, what you get is this official updated Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act. And in that situation, what the Department of the Interior did was say, we're going to manage these wild horses, and we are allowed to use motor vehicles and helicopters to round them up to keep their numbers in balance with the ecosystem. And so since 1971, they've been having wild horse roundups, and really terrifying, inhumane wild horse roundups have been going on for years. And so activists have been trying to, you know, stand up to this for years. There's a beautiful film, 2 films, where you can really get a sense of this, called, based on a wild horse named Cloud, and this was aired on PBS originally by a filmmaker named Ginger Catherines. And so if you were to, you know, look up Cloud and then see these documentaries, which are available now on DVD, and then also become a part of Ginger Catherine's nonprofit organization designed to protect wild horses, you would see a long history of this sort of stuff going on. Ken Salazar didn't come up with this idea. He just, you know, hasn't been as protective of Mustangs as people expected or would have liked, recognizing that he was elected, you know, during the Obama administration. So he's not the worst we've ever had, but he's not standing up for them in the way that we would like him to. And basically what happened was a couple of months ago, there was some legislation that got through that create the next step for horse slaughterhouses to possibly be reestablished again in the United States. And so it actually hasn't happened yet that horses are being sent off to slaughterhouses in the United States. There are no slaughterhouses for horses in the United States. But what happened was there was some kind of a policy that that got tagged on to another bill that got through Congress that allows for funding for the USDA to do inspections of horses. That's what got through.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of like, a big sign that we could be losing ground here. And there are people out there for sure who are actively lobbying to slaughter horses and have horse slaughterhouses again. And one of the excuses that they're using is that because of the economy, there are all these horses that are now suffering. People have been turning horses loose to run free because they can't feed them anymore. And isn't it just more humane to send them to a slaughterhouse? And, that's one of the arguments that people use. But you can't, a horse that's been a companion actually has had fly spray and all kinds of worming chemicals and perhaps a painkiller called bute that makes their meat dangerous for humans to consume.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument that we're going to take these unwanted horses and slaughter them is not valid because they wouldn't be cleared for human consumption. And so because the meat is carcinogenic at that point. And so that's just an argument that people are using to try to get this horse slaughter legislation through and open more horse slaughterhouses to send horse meat to France and Germany and wherever else they eat horse meat. But if they do that, they're going to have to raise horses especially for slaughter in order for it to be available for human consumption. So all these horses that are supposedly suffering right now are just going to be put down and not have their meat used anyway, and they're going to start a movement to breed horses for human consumption. And so that's where we need to just put a stop to all of it and not use the argument that, all these unwanted horses are out there, why don't they go to slaughter? Because slaughterhouses for horses, too, are not, they're quite inhumane. The kind of bolt that they use to the brain to, stun another smaller animal for slaughter, the way the horse is constructed, usually a number of horses wake up afterwards and are being slaughtered and vivisected alive and conscious.
Oh, man.
So slaughterhouses, the way they're designed, are so incredibly inhumane for horses that, the list just goes on and on and on about why we shouldn't be opening up for horse slaughter in this country. And purely for economic reasons, there are other reports that show that horse slaughterhouses in the past actually cost a community more money than they made for that community. It was the foreign importers of the meat that were making the money, and the slaughterhouse was actually costing a community more money than it was making them. So there's economic reasons, there's humane reasons, and then just based on the idea that, we should be lessening the number of animals we eat, and we should be not bringing in new ones. And we should also be concentrating on more humane ways of treating animals that are cleared for human consumption rather than bringing in new ones and making it more inhumane for them.
Right.
So, the factory farming element right now is one of the most abusive systems on the face of the planet. And so there's just, we should be concentrating on making those situations more humane and phasing out this overdependence on meat that we have that's part of our fast food culture.
Yeah. Have you noticed, are you a vegetarian, Linda?
No, I'm not.
Have you?
I don't. Pardon?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I go for long stretches trying to be a vegetarian, but I have a system that actually works better on a small amount of meat with not a whole lot of carbohydrates. So
yeah, I'm with you. I'm the same way. Yeah. Have you noticed?
Go ahead.
Do horses respond differently to carnivores or omnivores or herbivores, or do they just pretty much deal with everybody the same way?
No, I haven't seen any differences in the way they treat people depending on whether they eat meat or not. I mean, in traditional pastoral cultures where the herds move together, those people do eat meat, not very much. They mostly subsist on milk products. So, these human-animal associations in traditional pastoral cultures, there is that element of the human being both a caretaker and very selectively and humanely the herd predator. And in Mongolia, for instance, they only cull animals in the late fall that are the ones who are most likely not to survive the winter, and then they dry that meat and eat it over time. So in some sense, there's a kind of a deal where the animals, and they also, in pastoral cultures, very rarely would they ever eat a lamb or a young cow. Like we have veal and lamb here. When you tell people in those traditional pastoral cultures that we eat lamb and veal, quite often it brings tears to their eyes.
Interesting.
We never eat our young animals. They're our children. You know? And then when they go to cull a herd member that's not likely to make it through the winter or for a very special occasion, there's a ceremony around it. And there's also a feeling of reverence. And in some of these tribes, they actually believe that reincarnation occurs across species lines. Like in Mongolian tribes that are influenced by Buddhism, they believe that their relatives can come and go as humans or animals. And so there's this real element of sacrificing communion anytime a herd member is culled, because that might be your great Uncle Harry or something, Yeah. And so there's this, it really brings to light also this whole thing that was a part of Christianity early on. When Christ would have created the communion ritual for non-Jewish people, what he was really doing was trying to bring them into this non-predatory pastoral interdependence between man and nature culture. And it has since been adopted by, highly aggressive sedentary cultures. The Holy Roman Empire was that. And so while Christianity influenced that culture and made it less violent, that sedentary Roman culture also influenced Christianity and took away a lot of the original meaning behind what was being offered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Linda, do horses have a sense of humor?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you have any anecdotes that you would share regarding just kind of an out and out, really funny kind of horse tale?
Well, they're not like great joke tellers or anything.
Right.
They do these goofy little, they do goofy things, and, if you're standing up and you're talking to a group, one might come over and pull your hat off and do something funny with it. And it seems to have a certain eloquent timing to it, and then they'll run off and they'll have a really funny look on their face. It really looks like they're laughing. And, so they just engage in humor. They play these little jokes on each other. They sort of come in and snipe at each other and run off and invite the other one to chase them. And, so, there's a feeling of a sense of humor there, but it's more through action.
Right, than delivering one liner. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of taunting you to come and play than anything else.
So I'm really interested about when you make your transition from being a music writer, somebody really deeply ensconced in the music world, and all of a sudden taking this leap and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, write the book, and I'm going to explore what this means to me in my life, and then out of all this, you have this amazing center, Eponaquest, in Tucson, where you bring people into these seminars and you actually teach people. I mean, I'm on your website right now, and I'm looking at all these instructors all over the world who I'm assuming have gone through your program. So, I mean, you're making a very deep cultural impact. And this started with an interest, an idea, a relationship, and it's really become a full-blown life quest for you. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how maybe people can take something from that and apply that to their own lives and some of the transitions they might be going through?
Well, when I was writing the original book, The Tao of Equus, I was spending some time with my horse named Rasa, who started this whole thing. I named her Rasa, R-A-S-A, or it's actually short for tabula rasa, which means clean slate. But also the term rasa has a musical meaning simultaneously. The rasa in Indian music from India is there's the raga that's kind of like the scale that you're playing, and there's the rasa, which is like the emotional content and meaning behind what you're playing. And so she formed that in my life. It was like we were having this musical improvisation, and she held the meaning behind the improvisation as it unfolded through time. And there were some deeply mystical things that happened at the same time that she was also demanding that I become more functional in this world. Mm-hmm. And so horses have this amazing ability to sort of inspire in people an understanding of a kind of embodied spirituality, and the ability to ride between the worlds, more or less, between this practical world and then a world filled with potential and dreams and energy that we create from and bring in to manifest. And the horses were teaching me the whole time that I had to do both at the same time. I had to be functional in both worlds. And so I learned a lot of skills in both worlds. I had to be powerful in this world. I had to be, just to stand up to a horse and have them respect you and not hurt you. You have to have a certain level of power and presence, and you have to have the ability to be present in this world. And at the same time, horses cross-culturally, from Eastern cultures to Western cultures, are often associated with the ability to take human beings away from this world into the other world, where you speak with the gods and you exercise spiritual capabilities and you receive inspiration and bring it back into this world. And I found that my horses were doing that also, that this was not a metaphor. This was something that horses really do for people. Mm-hmm. Because people would come to study with me, and we would be learning some very practical emotional and social intelligence skills and empowerment skills, and yet at the same time they would be filled suddenly with inspiration and have great visionary and creative openings and huge amounts of energy for creativity when they returned home. And so I would say that a lot of what allowed these books to take off and for these people to be attracted to come and study here from around the world had to do with the power of what horses have to teach. Mm-hmm. Not something that I created. It was that I happened to be receptive enough to get the word out through my books and to capture something in writing that touched on something that people had always been feeling about horses and their ability to inspire us and empower us. And then it caused people to come from around the world to want to study, and then I had to develop workshops and techniques for teaching people, giving people direct access to the wisdom of the horses that I was portraying in the books. And mm-hmm. And so then eventually what I ended up doing was creating an apprenticeship program for people to learn how to become Epona-approved instructors, basically, and learn the techniques that I and my colleagues had developed in helping people learn advanced human development skills through working with horses. And so now we have over 160 instructors on 5 continents teaching this work and continuing to evolve this work through their own interactions with their horses.
That's absolutely amazing. So how many times a year do you have like open seminars at your center in Tucson for the public, not teachers or or people that want to be facilitators for your method, but just go there, experience, and learn.
Well, most of the workshops that I do are, 4-day workshops for anybody who wants to come. There's a workshop called Pioneering Spirit, Leadership for the 21st Century that, anybody can come to that workshop. And what I created over the years was 4 to 6 day workshops, because what was happening is so many people were coming from out of town. They didn't want to just show up for a day. They didn't want to come from Canada or Europe to a 1-day workshop. So I personally don't do many of those. But other instructors around the world you can look them up and see. Sometimes they have 1 and 2 day workshops where you can get a taste of this work and see if you want to go deeper. But when people decide to come to my place, generally they're coming from far enough away that they want a meaty workshop and they want to stay a little bit longer and learn a little bit more. So, yeah.
And you've evolved your teaching methodology, knowledge, to be able to translate that over the internet. And you have seminars that you're doing online. Can people really get a sense? Can the knowledge that you're distilling in your relationship with the horses really be transmitted over the internet, or is it something that people need to actually physically touch? How's that working out for you and other people's experience around the wisdom and the knowledge of the horse?
Well, I try to do a combination of both. Not everybody is in a position where right now they can come to Tucson and do a 4-day workshop with me, and maybe they don't have an APONA-approved instructor within 2 or 3 hours, so that even that may be becoming a hindrance to accessing these amazing tools that horses teach you. And so I did a couple of things. One, I created a book with a deck of horse wisdom cards called Way of the Horse, Equine Archetypes for Self-Discovery. This came out in 2007, and I worked with a really talented horse artist named Kim McElroy. And what I was wanting to do was to create an experience where people could engage with this deck of horse wisdom cards, where each card has a really evocative painting of a horse on it, and each card also represents a certain lesson that horses have to teach us that can help us in our human lives. And the card deck allows you to interact with that wisdom in a kind of a non-linear way as opposed to reading a book. But there's a full book that goes with it, and each chapter is one of those lessons that coincides with the cards. And so a lot of people have found that really useful, and a lot of people who aren't into horses necessarily have been working with this and finding it really useful, because horse wisdom is about being in the world in a non-predatory yet empowered way. And it's also about freedom through relationship. And so there's a lot of social intelligence skills you can learn from horses that we can convey through this book, The Way of the Horse. And you can get it off Amazon.com.
Okay.
But another thing is I wanted to go even deeper and be able to actually offer, it's one thing to write about this wisdom, and there's another thing to talk about it and have an interactive element to it. That's kind of the next level. And so the website symposium that we created for this, it's at poweroftheherd.com, and it's a symposium that will be going on for the next 10 months, which each month you'll be getting several lessons that involve printed elements as well as conversations that I have with the person who runs the website, a really talented English interviewer by the name of Mark Modershead. And so I basically teach him these skills, and you get to hear me teaching him the skills across the ocean over the internet. And through that experience, you can learn some of the skills and take them right back into your life.
Interesting stuff. So that's poweroftheherd.com. And then your website, your other website is eponiquest.com, and people can find out all about your work and seminars and all that good stuff there as well. Linda, I wanted to ask you about how working with horses and how accessing not just the knowledge but the social skills and all the other really fantastic things that we can learn from these wonderful creatures. Have you ever worked with recidivist culture? People coming out of institutions like prisons, or congressmen coming out of Washington D.C. No, I'm just kidding about that.
Right.
Have you ever worked with cultures like that, or people from these backgrounds, and had their lives changed in ways that they were just kind of thinking that would never happen to them?
Yes. We've worked with returning soldiers and their spouses with the horses, and they've had a life-changing effect with that. And some of my approved instructors are also social workers in the prison system, let's say, and they've actually taken some elements. This is how I know that this information that we've now translated into words and teachings for humans work even without horses, is that they've taken this work on emotional intelligence that we've learned from the horses into prisons and had it be very effective, even if they couldn't get a horse program in the prison system. And we've also had our tools used by people in the addictions field, because a lot of times people come out of a treatment center and they're moving through the 12 steps, but they don't have the additional emotional and social intelligence skills and empowerment skills to really be successful once they've given up whatever addiction was holding them back. So we find that a lot of the work with horses and a lot of this knowledge that we can now teach beyond the barn is very helpful for people coming out of an addiction situation.
Mm-hmm. What about kids? I mean, it seems to me like this would be like children would be prime in terms of anchoring some of these principles and patterns of communication and emotional intelligence. Do you have any programs set up specifically for children, or is there a certain age that you think that a child would be open to this in kind of a more sophisticated fashion?
Some of our instructors do work with kids. I don't personally, because I'm writing books and training a lot of instructors, and also working with a lot of adults who come to workshops. But a number of our instructors use this work with kids and have had amazing success, even working with schools for kids with difficulties. The world of therapeutic riding for persons with disabilities is over 50 years old in this country, and horses definitely are effective in that realm. But teaching children emotional and social intelligence skills and leadership skills is something that we specialize in. And we've had some kids that aren't doing well in conventional school, or are bullies who have been bullied or who have been abused, who learn these skills and really excel as a result. And we're just starting to get a little bit of formal research coming through now on the effectiveness of this, and it's very impressive. We had a woman named Lee Shambo who has a center in Washington State, and she developed a program that incorporated this work with horses, with also some of the skills that she teaches as a social worker. And she did a study on this as a pilot program with a group of women who were major abuse survivors who hadn't had any real success in conventional mental health situations. And by going through this sequence of skills with the horses and learning how to use emotions as information, which is one of the main things that we teach at Epona, 6 months after the program ended, their lives were completely different, and those who had been clinically depressed were actually tested out of the depression range 6 months after they had graduated from this program.
Wow, that's amazing. And I would think that if they had gone through an abusive situation, that one of the things that they may come in contact with would be a non-threatening version of a type of masculinity through a male horse that would be positive or reinforcing something more meaningful to them and sort of erasing past emotional patterns. Have you noticed this taking place?
Yeah. I mean, there are some programs actually that I take issue with that use horses with abuse survivors, and they're not opponent related because we really teach non-predatory forms of power and relationship skills. But some of these programs they're horse-related programs too, and they'll actually teach a person to go in with a horse and become quite dominant. And this is really harsh for an abuse survivor.
Yeah.
To take an abuse survivor and to teach them to treat another being as a tool or an object is causing them to do exactly to the horse what was done to them. So you have to watch some of the programs out there. If they talk about using the horse as a tool, it's not a good idea to get involved with that program, especially if you're an abuse survivor. Because some of these people use horse, quote-unquote, horse therapy in ways that treat the horse as an object. And they don't even really see the horse as a sentient being. They just see them as a means to an end. And that to me is not therapeutic.
Well, we're talking with Linda Kohanov, author of The Tao of Equus and a number of other books relating to horse culture, horse knowledge, horse wisdom, and our relationship to it. She's also got a website, uponaquest.com. You know, Linda, sometimes I open this up to people, since we're, streaming real time, I open this up to people to see if they want to call in, ask questions. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Would you be open to answering a couple of questions if people want to call in?
Sure.
Okay, well, let me give out the number here. It's 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995. You can call in, ask specific questions for Linda, or you can relate maybe a story that you have about horses or share something inspirational about horses. And we also have a Skype option that's available on the site. So if you have Skype, you can Skype in and also do that as well. So 2012, do you have any highlights besides the ongoing webinar syllabus that you're offering? What are some of the other things that people can look forward to from you in 2012?
Well, the Power of the Herd book should be out in August or early September of 2012. And with this book, it's almost like two books in one. The first part I call A Brief History of Power, and it really looks at the history of power in civilization from the perspective of a non-predatory approach to power. And one of the people that I find the most fascinating in this area is George Washington, actually. And George Washington is an example of somebody who had the ability to engage non-predatory power at crucial times during the Revolutionary War, which I believe caused us to win that war against all the odds.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a marvelous example of that. And the reason why I even noticed him to begin with was not because I had some burning need to be a patriot at that time, but when I was researching the role of horses in our culture's development, I found out that George Washington was not only considered one of the greatest riders in this country, but one of the greatest horse trainers in this country. Mm. And I began to read various biographies and began to see that he was actually employing horse wisdom and the kinds of wisdom you learn as a horse trainer or rider with people, and it gave him the edge, really, to do some amazingly innovative things. So it's almost as if this country is unknowingly based on a huge amount of horse wisdom that was translated through George Washington.
That's absolutely fascinating. Wow. Yeah, I mean, there are key moments in the American Revolutionary War where, Washington, had incredible amounts of patience. And at the same time, if he needed to remove somebody from a command, he did it without hesitation. He failed on a few of his early battles, but he also learned rather quickly after a few setbacks early on, and skillfully managed the entire operation from about halfway through a little bit before halfway through the American Revolutionary War. That's great knowledge. I didn't know that. What about, are there any other figures that you ran across in American history? I mean, I think Teddy Roosevelt will probably be a bad example, but are there any other figures that used, to your knowledge, this innate horse wisdom?
Well, yeah, there's a really good example of somebody who used it in a way that was perhaps not as enlightened as it could be, showing that horse wisdom can be like a double-edged sword. You can use it for benevolent reasons, or you can use it to your advantage, to have an advantage over others. And a good example of that would be Andrew Jackson. He was an exceptional horseman and gained a lot of presence and nonverbal wisdom through working with horses. But he didn't take on the non-predatory power aspects of it. He used horse wisdom to exercise that other 90%, that nonverbal wisdom that gives you an edge as a leader. But he had more of a predatory mentality about it. And so he pushed through a lot of legislation in ways that was at times destructive, because he's pretty much responsible for the Cherokee Trail of Tears. It was set in motion before he left. But the thing to know about Andrew Jackson is that he was a major trauma survivor. And so during the Revolutionary War, he was, as a 15-year-old, captured and held in this disturbing prison camp, and he was orphaned as a result of the Revolutionary War. And so from that time forward, he had amazing intelligence, amazing leadership presence, in part exercised through his expertness with horses. But he also had the erratic behavior of a trauma survivor. And so he's a very interesting case study that I mentioned in the book as well.
Wow, absolutely. We have somebody that wants to talk to you. I think they're from North San Diego County. Let's bring them on and find out who they are and what they want to share or ask. Okay. Yeah. Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, my name's Jay. Nice show.
Hi, Jay.
Thank you.
I had a question about, first of all, I really appreciate both of you sharing about the equine spirit and experience. And I just wanted to know if someone wants to get involved with either volunteering with horses or commuting with horses, but maybe doesn't have ranch hand experience or sort of direct training. Is there much opportunity to connect with programs such as yours, or people that maybe need caretakers, or is a degree of experience usually required for the horse's benefit?
Well, I think one of the best places where you can start volunteering is at a local therapeutic riding center. These centers are established for teaching riding skills and horse skills to persons with disabilities, but they have very strong volunteer programs, and they do a lot of training with their volunteers, so that's a nice place to start.
Okay, excellent.
So you could actually, Jay, you can go to Linda's website. In fact, I was just on the, let's see, there's somebody in Tehachapi County, San Diego, and Orange counties. There's Andy Burgess on the 760 tip. So there's plenty of people out there in many parts of the country where you can tap in. That's all available on Linda's website.
Yeah, those are people who actually employ the Epona techniques, and so they are often looking for volunteers. But sometimes they have smaller programs, and so they don't have as much of a formal volunteer program. So, I would definitely start with the Epona instructors in your area. But if you're finding that they're booked right now with their own volunteer programs, then check also the North American Riding for the Handicapped Association website. I think they call it PATH now, actually, PATH. They changed the title. Or you could look up in your phone book for local therapeutic riding centers and start there as well.
Does that sound good, Jay?
Yeah, and I had another question, which I'll actually fear to answer off the air, but I wanted to see if you could explore, if Linda could explore what are some of the primary benefits and lessons that she's learned from connecting with horses that she uses in her day-to-day relationships, like present day, as opposed to post-writing the book.
Okay, good question. All right, thanks for calling in.
Thank you.
All right. So I think she's
Thanks, Jay.
She's basically saying, how do you handle Steve? I think that's what she's asking you.
Well, that could be an interesting conversation for Steve someday. Some of the primary lessons I've learned from horses are that, first of all, that emotions are contagious. Emotion is like a language to them. And there's research being done now to show that among groups of people, emotion is actually contagious. We grew up in this culture thinking that emotions were irrational, self-contained sensations that just exploded at the wrong moment and caused us trouble. But what horses show is that emotion travels at a distance as an actual language. And so the first time I realized this was I was out in the field with a group of horses, and it was a beautiful fall day, like, 85 degrees, perfectly clear out, just a gorgeous day. And I was out mingling with a herd of horses, and I was sort of standing next to my horse Rasa, and I was petting her and just kind of relaxing and enjoying the day. And one of my other horses at a considerable distance, like 80 to 90 feet away from us, he actually saw something that alarmed him before I did. And basically what it was a mountain biker, and it was coming through the edge of this ranch where I had my horses at the time. And from a horse's perspective, a mountain biker is a really odd, unnatural, threatening-looking creature. I mean, he's wearing a helmet that's shaped like the skull of the creature from Alien, and he's got usually some kind of really fluorescent clothes that he's wearing, and he's moving really fast, but he's slithering like a snake. He's not actually making steps like a normal creature would.
Right.
And so this was very alarming and surprising to my other horse, Noche. And yet before he could even lift his head off the ground, let alone turn his 1,000-pound body to run past me, in that split second, he sent a shock wave that affected the entire herd, and because I was standing there with them, also my body. And what happened was, before that he could lift his head up and turn and run, I felt a jolt of shock hit my body, and it caused my gut to clench. And then it caused my breathing to catch in my throat. And as all the rest of the horses ran past me, I was also like in this flight or fight pose. It's like my body got a shock wave that was sent through the air, caused a response in my body, put my body into flight or fight mode, caused me to turn to start to run before my conscious mind could even catch up. And so I realized, emotions are contagious among horses, like instantaneously, so that they don't actually lift their heads up and call to each other and say, hey, there's something scary here. They literally create a signal through their nervous system that moves at an incredible distance, like a sound wave or a shock wave of some kind that affects your physical body.
Wow.
And that's how they use emotions as language. So what happened was I also was standing there, and I avoided running because then I saw the the mountain biker, and I had my back to these horses who had run past me. So if it had been something threatening, I would have been lunch. But, and I just was looking at this guy, and I was kind of chuckling to myself because it was kind of funny to see this guy kind of from a horse's perspective.
Sure.
And I was about to turn around and tell the herd that everything was okay, and they had already gotten the message from my change in my breathing and my change in my heart rate and my change in my body posture as I was standing there with my back to them. And so, excuse me, somehow I had also transmitted non-verbally a sense of relaxation and amusement that was immediately communicated to the horses, who were then standing behind me and kind of looking at it like, yeah, that is kind of funny. And so I realized that emotion is a nonverbal language.
That's incredibly sophisticated. I mean, really, really super sophisticated. And that's amazing. And you know what else strikes me about that story, Linda, is that here you are, you're out there with the horses, and because you're with them and attempting to perceive the mountain biker from their perspective, right? You're seeing the mountain biker in an entirely different way. And so the horse is actually teaching you also in that moment to be alert and kind of reassess your version, your own version, your own personalized version of reality, and see it from somebody else's perspective or somebody else's point of view.
Yeah, it was quite amazing to like be drawn into their world and to spend large amounts of time with them in that way and be influenced by them as much as they were influenced by me. And I learned, I think, a whole lot more from them than they ever learned from me in the process. And I've just been writing, massive amounts of words about it ever since.
Wow.
But the other thing that you learn to take this lesson further is when you're with horses, especially when you're training them or training young horses or riding horses, this is one of the things that you learn that's relevant to leadership, a different form of leadership, is that you learn how to use that emotional information, that nonverbal information. You learn how to sense it, and then you learn how to turn it around. So that if I'm with a young horse who's scared, so that they don't take off and spook, I actually feel the shock wave in my body, and then I breathe into it and create the opposite of fear in my own body, and then that calms the horse down next to me.
Yeah.
So I don't actually say, oh, it's okay, calm down. I literally feel the shock wave and then breathe into it and turn it around and create relaxation, which causes then the horse to relax. So you learn how to do this with large groups of people. What you really learn is sophisticated nonverbal skills for fear management in large groups.
Interesting. Really interesting stuff. I have my own personal little horse experience over the summer. My son goes to a summer camp, and it's a day camp, but it's a good one, and at least 1 to 2 days out of the week, he's learning how to ride horses, right? And
Great.
it's fantastic. So there's like the final day where the parents get to go out and see what their kids have learned, and where the $3,000 went to over the summer. So we watched him ride this horse. He was a big horse, and he was cantering and doing all that stuff, and I could tell that the horse was just incredibly patient with my son, who's kind of a goofball, and he was a good little rider, but he was also kind of showing off a little bit, laying down on the horse, and while the horse was standing, just doing a little kid stuff, and I could just see that he was incredibly patient, and he brought the horse over. He rode the horse over to us, and while we're on the other side of the fence, and I just I really just bonded with that horse, and I just said to him, I said, you know what, you are a good guy, you're a really good guy, and I really appreciate you being so patient with my son, and I could feel that horse respond to me. It was like I could just feel him go, oh, thank you. I mean, it sounds crazy. But I felt
no, it doesn't. They can tell. They can feel that.
Yeah, and you know, he actually kind of leaned. Then I walked into the ring, and he kind of leaned into me a little bit, you know, like he was, you know, kind of going, oh, I'm glad somebody recognizes that I'm having to put up with your little, you know, your little brat here, you know. He's not a brat, but it was. I mean, I could feel a sense of connection and reciprocal relating from that horse. It was great.
Yeah, they're extremely intelligent animals. I was watching David Letterman the other night, and he had Robert Downey Jr. on, and Robert Downey Jr. brought a picture of all of the animals at his house, and he had a couple of horses there, and I guess that Robert Downey Jr. had been on the show before and mentioned the horses, and David said, when are you going to ride these animals? And Robert was like, no, I don't really need to ride them. They don't need to be ridden. They don't care about that. And David said something that's very common for people to say, actually. He said, well, you know, I think you're probably right. They are really beautiful and powerful animals, but they have these tiny little brains. And that is the extreme misconception about horses. They don't have tiny little brains. And, you know, they respond in ways that are so far beyond instinct. It's astonishing. I mean, you mentioned the show War Horse that's coming out on Christmas Day, the film, and the fact that a horse could be trained to go into war at all means that he's transcending every hardwired impulse he has as a prey animal. If he wasn't able to learn something new, to transcend his own fear and his own survival needs, a horse would never go anywhere near the scent of blood, let alone a raging battle like they were for years and years and years. And there are actually horses that show heroic levels of courage. You know, just like humans, some humans are capable of courage and of heroic acts, and horses are the same way. And so this movie coming out, War Horse, I think will be fun to see how they handle that, and just to realize that you cannot transcend instinct at that level unless you have a really high functioning brain, because it's your brain that allows you to learn new things and to take an instinct and say no to it and do something completely the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It will be interesting. It's a Spielberg production, and we know that the sentimentality quotient gets dialed up to 11 on Spielberg, but
right, I'm sure this one is going to be just like that.
Yeah, but and it's animated too, so it'll be interesting to see how that gets played out. You know, it's
animated too. It looked like it was actual regular actors.
Maybe I'm confusing it with his other. I'm confusing it with his other Christmas Day film, which is Tintin. My bad. That's animated.
Oh,
so,
yeah. No.
Yeah, you got two films coming out at the same time. Yeah, I was just thinking here really quickly because it was funny as we were talking. I got sent an email because I do multitask at times while I'm doing this. So I got sent an email, and it was about Senate Bill 1867, which is this just egregious unlimited detention for Americans in the war on terror. And this guy sent this email, and he's Croatian or Serbian. I think he was Serbian, and he said in the email, I'll read it to you. He said, let me see if I can find it here just really quickly. He says, the old Serbian proverb for useless job, do not whip a dead mare. And I thought about this. This just happened, by the way, it's like while we're talking. And I thought about all the horse expressions that we have in our culture, like don't be a horse's ass, or don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? I mean, our culture is just loaded with these idioms and aphorisms around horses and how entrenched they are in our lives. Have you looked at how pervasive the horses in our language? I'm sure you have. I'm just throwing that out there to you.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we're so intertwined with horses, and we wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for horses, because, I mean, it was our ability to ride horses that allowed us to become more mobile and powerful to begin with. And it's really only in the last 100 years that horses have become more removed from our lives in terms of seeing them and working with them and riding them or using them to pull a wagon on a daily basis. And so, you know, for 6,000 years, really, horses were a part of our lives and changed our culture and allowed us to move into places where we couldn't have gone on our own 2 feet, not nearly so easily. And they did something outrageous, you know, again, that was completely against every instinct they have, is that they, you know, got on ships and traveled across the ocean and came over here. And the whole time that people were riding and working with those horses, the horses were shifting something in people. So it's like we've lost a lot of that nonverbal knowledge that many people were getting on a daily basis when we, you know, removed horses from our daily lives. But at the same time, it's like that now that they're no longer required to, you know, carry us to war or to work, now that they've been freed from that, they're actually doing something that I think is more important, and they're really teaching us all kinds of additional personal development skills, mental, emotional, and spiritual skills that we need to develop our consciousness to the next level. And they're also available to teach us how to be powerful and non-predatory at the same time, which we need now more than ever.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Linda, this has been an absolute delight, you know, catching up with you and finding out more about this fascinating and complex world and relationship that we have with horses. And I would love to have you back on when your new book comes out in the fall and catch up with you again and talk more about the world. It will be 9 months into 2012 at that point. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, well, best of luck with all of your work, Robert. It's been a real joy to reconnect with you.
Yeah, it's been great on my end as well, and say hi to Steve for me, and you know, and I'll be in touch and, you know, catch up and you know, maybe one of these days I'll come out and pay a visit and just see what you're doing out there.
Absolutely, you'll have to meet the horses.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thanks again, Linda.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. That was Linda Kohanov, author of The Tao of Equus, and I think 3 other books. I think she's up to 4. I think the 5th will be coming out, Power of the Herd, in August, September. You can find out more about her and her work. ipanaquest.com. That's her website, ipanaquest.com. A great interview to have during the month of Sagittarius at 25 degrees, I believe, right now, which would make it absolutely conjunct my Jupiter in Sagittarius in the first house. An expansive moment in time for yours truly. Let's see. Monday, I've got the mashup, and I think I'm going to play this 45-minute interview I did with what's his name? Jeff. God, I'm sorry. I've completely spaced out my show. Let me see. It's let's see if he's in here. No. Now I've got to find it. I've got to find the interview. It's about subliminal persuasion in our culture and our environment. And if I can find this here. Let me see. Well, you know what? I'm having an aluminum dioxide senior brain moment. I believe it's with Jeff Warwick. That's what it is. Jeff Warwick. There we go. It's Jeff Warwick. Thank you. And I'll have that interview on the show on Monday. And Wednesday, more navigation of the astrological realms. And then Friday will be the last show until probably after the first of the year. I may do a few reruns, but I'm going to take probably a week or two off. The first week in December, I won't have any shows. The last week in December, starting with the 26th, I'll be off that week. And I may have a show on the 30th as kind of a year-end show, but I won't have anything else before then. I'll do one final show of the year after next Friday's show because I've got a lot of work to do. I'm trying to get a new website up, hopefully by the end of the year. That's the goal. However, next Friday on the 23rd, I'm going to have Les Visible on, the mega blogger who has Smoking Mirrors and lesvisible.com and Zippity Doodah and, all these other amazing websites. He's got to be one of the most prolific bloggers on the internet. So Les is going to come on the show on the 23rd, and we'll kick around the state of the planet. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of interesting topics and strange and unusual nodes of interaction between the two of us. So you don't want to miss that show. And Monday's show is going to be good. The interview with Jeff Warwick and I is really, really good. So listen to that and be available for that. So again, I want to thank Linda Kohanov for being on the show and sharing with us the wisdom of the horse, the Tao of Equus. And anything else? No, I think it's about it. So you can be a predator and you can be a non-predator. You can use the power of the instinctual power of being a power animal in a non-predatory fashion. And I think that this is really the time where we need to be able to do that in a very, very big way. There's a lot happening with things going on in our legal system and with Congress and Senate and SB 1867 that are deeply, deeply troubling. And any of you who follow, what's happening in that world, you need to be concerned. And we have to be strong members of the herd in our own unique way. There was I don't want to write about this. There was a video that was brought to my attention yesterday at my son's martial arts studio. And I was sitting down talking with his teachers, Alan and Lily, who do a wonderful job in terms of running their school and have a great vision for teaching martial arts on an MMA on a very very sophisticated, integrated level. And I was talking to them about, should I get my kid into another martial art while he's doing this? And they were saying, no. And so we started to talk about why MMA, in conjunction with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is perhaps the most effective form of defense that anybody can learn. More so than Kung Fu, more so than Taekwondo. So, we kicked this around, and they said, just about anybody that's gone up against an MMA guy who knows Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu loses. I mean, if you look back on the history of MMA, the guy that changed everything was Royce Gracie from the Gracie school down in Brazil. I mean, he changed mixed martial arts. They were doing the cage matches, and once Gracie got into these matches, he defeated everybody because he got them on the ground and he was able to submit them. And basically, he was like a boa constrictor, not let these guys up. So MMA has changed the martial arts world. So I was trying to come up with the one martial art that would trump MMA. And I said, well, what about a Qigong master who could just, use the power of Qi? I said, well, there's actually a case of this where a Qigong master challenged an MMA guy. He put up $5,000. This is in Japan. $5,000 to fight an MMA fighter. And this one MMA guy took up the challenge. Now, the prelude to all this is this, he's probably in his 60s, this Qigong guy, and he's like fighting kids or people at his studio, and he's flipping them around with his finger, and they're doing, he's, shooting them left, he's shooting them right, they're doing all kinds of stuff. He's making people dance like puppets, 7 to 10 feet away. It's incredible. Like, wow, this is amazing. So then he goes up against this MMA guy, and he's centering and getting his chi together, and he starts doing his thing and trying to move the guy. And the MMA guy is not doing anything. He's like, the magic tricks are not working on the MMA guy. And all of a sudden, the MMA guy comes in and he throws the old guy. Not only does he throw him, he hits him with an elbow. MMA it's pretty intense. You can use fists and elbows and knees, and it's anything goes. And he comes in and he throws him, and he smashes the old dude in the face, and he hits him in the nose. He starts bloodying his nose, and he breaks it up. The ref breaks it up. They come back out, and he does the same thing again. This time he kind of gets him down, and he takes his fist and he just starts smashing the old Qigong master in the face, and is beating the shit out of him. And they have to stop the fight. Fight's over in about a minute and a half. And I sat there and I was absolutely amazed. Absolutely amazed. How could this Qigong master in his studio move these people around like they're invisible marionettes, invisibly like marionettes? And then have somebody from outside the studio come in and just crush him. And make him not just beat him, but just make him look pathetic. How does this happen? And I realized in that moment that the Qigong master had power over everybody in that studio. He had determined, he had told them that he was the power. He had entrained them to believe that his power was doing all of these things. It was a case of mass hypnosis. And when somebody came in from outside the studio who was not part of that trance, it took one or two blows to simply level the Qigong master. It's one of the most powerful videos I've ever seen. And it's sad. It's absolutely sad. And what's the moral of the story? Well, the moral of the story is that there are old and entrenched power structures out there who have people entranced, and that are moving them around like marionettes invisibly, because these people are entranced. Now, my feeling is that this is just the ultimate result of an accumulation of behaviors and consensual agreement. Is it nefarious? Is it dark? Is it malevolent? Maybe. Is it entrenched in robotic? Yes. Yes. And how do we break the spell? We come in from the outside. We come in from the outside with an outside perspective, and we don't see the same things. And therefore, we are not under the power of the spell. So, perhaps this is what horses can teach us in their own instinctual and unique way. Perhaps this is what nature can teach us as well, and not just horses. So get out there. Go experience some nature. Touch it, feel it, breathe it, be it. Break the spell. and come back on Monday with an outside perspective and listen to the show again. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Friday Forecast. My guest was Linda Kohanov. It's Philip K. Dick's birthday. Let's get out of here with some Philip K. Dick. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, deja vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.